والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. أيها الإخوة المسلمون في كل مكان، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وبعد، أتوجه برسالة اليوم لأهلنا في شام الرباط والجهاد والعزة والعروبة والكرامة، شام الانتفاض على الذل، شام التصدي للظلم والظالمين، شام التضحية والفداء، شام الرفعة والإباء. فأقول لهم: سلام عليكم أيها الأحبة الأبطال، سلام عليكم أيها المجاهدون الآمرون بالمعروف والناهون عن المنكر، سلام عليكم أيها المظلومون المقهورون المعذبون.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Muammar Gaddafi. This marks the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya. You have won your revolution, and now we will be a partner as you forge a future that provides dignity, freedom, and opportunity.
خرجوا وشقوا، قولوا له: بل أنت زعيم عصابة المجرمين. قولوا له: لقد مضى عهد الإذلال وولى زمن الخداع.
Assad will leave power.
Assad is standing in their way.
And everyone can speculate about what that would mean for President Assad. But the
This is more the prescription for how to deal with the world.
What are the forces at play in the world today? A question that remains unanswered by those entrusted to communicate to us the truth. Yet, we ourselves fall short from attaining it, not for lack of access, but because of an unbroken fear that has obscured our vision. They stand as heroes, but in fact are our destroyers, operating behind the shadows of a grand scheme larger than the destruction they themselves conceive. The goal is imperial domination, and only few have risen against them. The goal is total control in a situation where their own cause is defeating them.
The world, stock prices fell like
the goal
dominoes.
Comes from no nation, but an outside force that has taken them hostage. Who their players are, we must know now if we are to defeat them. Yet the question remains: will we do so in time, before it becomes too late for yourselves, for your family, your children, and civilization? This is the true story of Syria.
I am personally shocked and horrified by the tragic incident in Hula 2 days ago, which took so many innocent lives, children, women, and men. This was an appalling crime, and the Security Council has rightly condemned it. And I extend my profound condolences and my heart.
The public mind has been drowned out by shouts from the Western sphere of influence, led by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair's doctrine of responsibility to protect, with complicity from the U.S. governments of George W. Bush, continued by President Barack Obama. Hoisting the flag of humanitarian intervention, the U.S., with obscure evidence provided by Tony Blair's British government in 2003, invaded Iraq. Similar allegations for protecting the people of foreign lands brought about the international military involvement in the war in Libya in 2011 and the Kosovo-Serbian fiasco during the late 1990s. In these cases, under shouts for annihilating a brutal dictatorial regime, which in fact most of them were, false evidence was provided, U.S. constitutional laws violated, all in the name of toppling dictatorial regimes under the auspices of protecting their civilians.
And in the circumstances that we faced then, but I think even if you look back now, it was better to deal with this threat, to deal with it, to remove him from office, and I do genuinely believe that the world is safer as a result. I believe he threatened.
It is under this scope by which we are to examine what occurred in Hula, Syria, May 25th, 2012.
This particular tragedy has again drawn the attention of the world to what is happening in Syria.
Для нас совершенно не является главным, кто является во власти в Сирии, какой режим в Сирии. Главное для нас обеспечить прежде всего прекращение любого насилия.
But the urgent thing now is to try to get such a political process started under whatever terms can be agreed between Kofi Annan, the Assad regime, the relevant opposition forces in Syria. That is what we are all united about doing.
И когда некоторые наши партнеры, особенно из числа стран, которые расположены ближе к Сирии, чем Россия или Великобритания, начинают говорить, что только смена режима решит проблему, у меня возникает сомнение в искренности их заявлений о том, что они хотят прекратить насилие, помочь прекратить насилие.
In the wake of the Hula massacre, Russia, the strongest proponents for carrying out Kofi Annan's six-point peace plan since he was appointed UN Arab League peace envoy to Syria in late February, led a crucial battle during the weekend of the massacre to determine with conclusive evidence what had actually happened in the brutal events of May 25th. Russia called an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council 2 days later on a Sunday afternoon. The UNSC received a briefing from Norwegian General Robert Mood, head of the 200-plus UN observer mission deployed into Syria as part of the Annan peace plan, where he told members of the Permanent Security Council, plus a representative from Germany, that the evidence was, quote, murky as to who led the slaughter against civilians in Syria. But despite the general's caution that at the moment no conclusion can be made as to who was at fault, and with the Russians and a UNSC letter stating that an investigation is required, not a second passed from the adjournment of the UNSC closed-door meeting before the French, British, and German envoys raced to the microphones in the press area, concluding for the public Assad was undeniably to blame.
UN ambassadors went a step further to blame the Syrian government. From Germany,
there is a clear footprint of the government in this massacre.
The Council has issued a strong and united condemnation of the mass killings of civilians on the 25th of May in El Hula, including by artillery, shelling and tank fire from the Syrian regime.
That the Syrian government,
Russian Deputy Envoy Alexander Pankin was left to explain calmly to the media the true accounts delivered by General Mood, clarifying that the general had established evidence of tanks being present in Hula, a claim used by the British sphere of influence to say those were the footprints of the regime's involvement, but that Mood did not link tank shellings to the number of deaths. In fact, according to accounts, most of the over 100 massacre in Hula were killed at close range. Pankin then raised what the British faction of the West and Arab region wished would have remained unsaid. There is a third force terrorist or foreign intervention at play.
Yes, there is a third element, or there are third elements. And these people are not committed to the cause of the Syrian people. They are committed to their own agenda.
Hervé Latsius made these remarks 4 days before Hula. However, hours before the atrocity, State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland recalled the right to enforce Chapter 7, the UN Security Council clause to invoke foreign military intervention by air, land, and sea in the event that Annan's plan proved to be a failure.
That it's time, the Secretary's made clear, it's going to be Chapter 7
At the same
next.
time, every day, dozens of people are getting killed.
Was it this third force Latsius warned of days before the massacre who waged the massacre? How could we know? When the British and German envoys screamed Assad to the press before any investigation was allowed to take place. Assad screamed vociferously, drowning General Robert Mood's conclusion that the evidence was murky.
We would do that with our allies, bearing in mind, of course, what can be secured at the UN Security Council and what is practical and effective. So we're not ruling anything out, but a military intervention in Syria, as I've always pointed out, would have to be vastly greater in scale than was the case in Libya.
There seems to me to be only one other alternative. Members of the international community are left with the option only of having to consider whether they're prepared to take actions outside of the Annan Plan and the authority of this council.
Within 24 hours of Russia's emergency closed-door meeting, a Syrian rebel spokesman proclaimed that the massacre now justified the opposition's right to end their commitment to Annan's ceasefire, playing right into the hands of what had been the intent of the British with complicity of the US Obama government before and after the atrocity, an end to Kofi Annan's peace plan. If an investigation would have led to the truth that Bashar al-Assad's regime indeed was to blame for the massacre, no investigation at the time was even allowed to be carried out to discover if it was true.
To reaffirm one of the oldest, one of the strongest alliances the world has ever.
A few days after the hideous bloodbath in the Syrian city of Hula, 11-year-old Ali al-Sayed suddenly became famous in the Arab media. When armed men invaded the house of his family in Hula and murdered all the members of his family in cold blood, little Ali also dropped to the ground. The blood of his dead mother, who lay next to him, colored his clothes red. This saved his life, because the murderers thought that Ali was also dead. It is striking that the 11-year-old Ali twice described the murderers of his family as men with shaved heads and long beards. This definitely does not fit the soldiers of the Syrian army, but rather points in the direction of...
According to eyewitness testimonies, the massacre happened during the time frame after the Friday prayers, when Sunni rebels attacked 3 Syrian army checkpoints around Hula. Despite the fact that Hula has a more than 90% Sunni population, almost exclusively families from the Alawi and Shia minorities in Hula were killed. Those killed include members of the Alawi family Shomalia and the family of a Sunni member of parliament, since he was considered as a government collaborator. Immediately after the massacre, the culprits filmed their victims, representing them as Sunni victims and distributing the videos on the internet.